So, welcome to this Linguistics Open Day event. Normally, we would obviously welcome you to college and we would have a meeting where you could come and talk to us about questions you had about the courses, talk to some students, but unfortunately, we can't do that, so this is the next best thing. My name is Jamie Findlay. I'm a lecturer in linguistics at Jesus College, and I'm here with Dalveen Sandhu, who's a first-year Spanish and linguistics student, and Jamie Slagle, who's a second-year philosophy and linguistics student. And we're going to talk a little bit about some common questions and queries people have about the linguistics course at Oxford. And but if there's anything that we don't cover and that you want to know more about, please feel free to get in touch with me. I put my email address at the end of the slides. I'm always happy to take queries. So the first thing to talk about is kind of the nature of the linguistics course at Oxford. So linguistics is one of those subjects that you cannot study on its own. So if you want to study linguistics at Oxford, you have to do it as one of two degrees, either alongside a modern language in modern languages and linguistics, which is sometimes called MLL, or alongside one of psychology or philosophy in PPL. So obviously when it comes to admissions and other requirements, these degrees will have things coming from the other subject, but we won't talk about those very much today. I'm going to focus on the sort of linguistic side of the courses and of the admissions. And yeah, Jamie and Dalveen represent each of these courses, so they'll be able to talk about the sort of particular properties that they have. So one of the most common things people will ask about when we talk about applying for linguistics is the fact that they won't have studied linguistics before, right? So people, it's not a subject that you study at school, and so people quite understandably want to know, well, what should I know before I apply? And it's certainly true that we don't expect you to have studied linguistics at all. It's not a subject that you can do at school. Even A-level English language, which is probably the closest thing to linguistics that you can do at school, really only scratches the surface of what is a very vast discipline. So we don't at all expect you to have studied anything. What we do want, though, is for you to show us why it is that you want to study linguistics, what it is that's taken your interest, and show us that you've kind of pursued that a little bit. So what I want to do now is ask Jamie and Dalveen what it is that you did to prepare before you applied, and also what made you want to apply for linguistics in the first place, being as it's not something people will have encountered before. What got you interested in the subject? Maybe we should start with Dalveen.
Yeah, so I did A-level English language and we did a topic on sociolinguistics. So we kind of learnt about accent and dialect, and I found it really interesting. I hadn't heard of linguistics before, and I didn't know it was a degree you could study. It was actually my English teacher who suggested it to me, because I remember I had a conversation with him and we were just talking about university, and he knew that I was really interested in the grammatical aspects of English language, and we also did a little bit of psycholinguistics, and I just found it really interesting. So he recommended some beginner books, like I think I read The Language Instinct, and from there I was just really interested in applying for it, and then I just did more research and I decided to apply.
So was it mostly books and things that you read, or where did you find information?
Yeah, I watched some TED Talks as well. That's a really good way. So some linguists have good talks on their research. So I watched a few documentaries and videos on YouTube, and then my English teacher would recommend me some books that are really introductory. And then from there, when I was thinking about doing it at university, there's always a reading list that, like Oxford have one on their website. So I would just choose a few that I found interesting, and I'd have a little read through there just to see, kind of gauge what linguistics is about and make sure that I wanted to study it.
Cool, thank you. Jamie, what about you?
Yeah, so I think when I was in year 11, someone who was 2 years above me just mentioned that they were going off to Cambridge to study Spanish and linguistics, and was telling me, oh, I think you'd be really interested in linguistics and you must read this book. And I also started off by reading The Language Instinct by Steven Pinker, which I'd highly recommend to anyone out there. So yeah, I first read that and I was just fascinated by it. And yeah, I just kept reading, really. I read a book called The Language Myth, Through the Language Glass, Jean Aitchison's book on language change, and a lot of stuff by David Crystal. who I highly recommend. He's a really interesting writer about linguistics, and a lot of it's very accessible. And I also read like a few introductions to linguistics as well. And then I went on to write what was essentially my EPQ about Chomsky and universal grammar and some stuff like that. So yeah, I just kind of started off by reading a book and just kept reading and thinking about it more and more. And yeah, I think that's probably the best way to go about it.
Yeah. So I'm going to put some links to various resources at the end of the slideshow, so you can look at some of the reading lists and some online resources as well if you do want to know more. It's interesting you mentioned the EPQ. It's true that although you can't study linguistics at school, really some people who are interested try to turn an EPQ or an IB extended essay or something into a more linguistic project. I mean, which is great as well. So if you're trying to get more linguistics into your curriculum, that's the way to do it. But yeah, we certainly don't expect you to have done anything like that. Cool. Well, speaking of subjects, next question I had is which sixth form subjects are useful? So if people are looking to pick A levels, or if they're looking to think what they should focus on, which subjects do you require? Well, partly your requirements will depend on which degree you're doing, right? So if you're doing modern languages and linguistics, you do need to have a modern language, unless you do one of the ab initio courses. So there are 3 languages that you can do from scratch alongside linguistics. There's modern Greek, Italian, and Portuguese. But if you do any of the other subject combinations, so French and linguistics, German and linguistics, etc., then you will need to have studied that language at A level. For BPL, there's no language requirement. For all linguistics degrees, we say that English language can be useful, mathematics can be really useful, and any science, which sometimes comes as a surprise to people because they think of linguistics as more on the humanities side of things, but it is a very sort of scientific approach to language, and so it is useful to have that kind of analytical skill set as well. But none of these things are essential. There's no subjects that you're required to have. So Jamie and Darwin, are there any subjects that you found that you've used or that you were glad that you studied at school when it came to studying linguistics, or were there none?
So I did Spanish because I'm studying Spanish at university, so I'd have to have that. So and then alongside that, I did English language A level, and I think English language is a good introduction to linguistics because in my course we did study accent and dialect and child language acquisition. So that was my first introduction to linguistics. And then I also studied English literature, which is really good because it develops your analytical skills, and you do use those in linguistics as well. And I did an AS in psychology, which is very closely linked to linguistics, especially if you're doing psycholinguistics and the biological modules as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of what I studied, I think kind of almost anything I'd have studied would have come in useful in some way. There wasn't anything like particular. I didn't study English language, regrettably. So to be honest, I think most things would have come in useful. I remember when I was reading the kind of subject suggestions and it said maths, English language, or any science, and I studied none of the above. I was very worried that would count against me in my application, but clearly not enough to stop me from getting in. So that's kind of helpful but not necessary. I was fortunate enough to study Latin to A level and also French to AS, and they were very grammatical and very grammatically focused. In particular, my French teacher was extremely kind of focused on grammar, and that really helped me to kind of develop my interest in the grammatical side of linguistics, I suppose. But I agree with Dalvin. I also studied philosophy, and the philosophy and the English literature, which were my other 2 A levels, were really useful in teaching me how to kind of read long, dense texts and to analyze what was said in them, which has been very useful studying linguistics at university.
Yeah, that's true. So I think languages are definitely useful but not essential, and yeah, anything is going to teach you kind of some relevant skills. So definitely good. Excellent. Okay, so the next question I have here is, what's the linguistics course at Oxford like, and how does it compare to other universities' courses? We have a very fixed first year, and then you have to do general linguistics, which covers more of the kind of philosophical foundations of linguistics, as well as things like sociolinguistics, historical linguistics, things like that. Then we have grammatical analysis, where you look at kind of sentence structure and word structure and things like that. And that's a much more technical course. And then there's phonetics and phonology, where you look at sounds and sound structure. The last two are taught in classes, and the general linguistics is taught in the kind of standard Oxford tutorial. You'll write an essay and then discuss this with your tutor. But after your first year, you have a lot more options, a lot more freedom, and we do have quite a range of specialisms here, from the kind of theoretical syntax and semantics and more sort of technical side of things, all the way down to experimental things like psycholinguistics and acoustic phonetics and things that require much more empirical mindset, perhaps. So we have a very wide range of things to offer. There's also the opportunity to do your own individual project as well, in the form of a linguistic project or a linguistic thesis, where you can conduct your own research, data collection and things like that, which is really nice if people have interests that aren't exactly catered for by the courses that are available. What we don't do are things like computational linguistics and forensic linguistics or discourse analysis, for example, which you might find in some other linguistics departments that are more closely aligned to an English language orientation in different universities. There is a thriving computational linguistics community at Oxford, but it's in the computer science department rather than in linguistics. So if those are of particular interest to you, then it might not be the right course, but otherwise there are a lot of options. So Jamie and Dalvin, how have you found the course? Are there bits that you've enjoyed more or less than others? Are there things that have surprised you, or how have you found it?
I think the fact that there are so many modules in the first year and you cover such a wide range is really useful, because especially if you haven't studied linguistics before, it gives you a chance to do a bit of everything, and then you can from there see what you're interested in. This year, I think my favourite topics have been sociolinguistics and historical linguistics. Sociolinguistics I did a little bit at A-level, so I knew I enjoyed that anyway, but historical linguistics was completely new to me and I just found it really enjoyable. So that would be my favourite part.
Yeah, I think one of the things, as Dalvin mentioned, is that the broad initial education is really useful. For me, I felt like what was so beneficial about it is that I knew that I'd come out of my degree at Oxford and I'd have a basic understanding of the kind of, some of the core areas of linguistics. And although I liked perhaps some bits more than others, it was really good to know that I had that core knowledge and I could apply that later on in my course. So, I mean, I was quite surprised. So it is not directly related to linguistics, but if you're doing PPL, you do have to study statistics, which was something which was going to put me off. But that was actually really fun and has been really useful in my linguistics degree. So I found that as to be much more enjoyable than I expected and really interesting. And then with regards to linguistics, I really enjoyed the fact that at Oxford we do quite a lot studying kind of the history and the foundations of linguistics and kind of how it relates to cognitive science as a whole. So that's led me to study the philosophy of cognitive science in my philosophy half of my degree. And I've also studied semantics, which also it kind of is at the overlap between linguistics and philosophy. So I found that really interesting because as a degree, PPL is very multidisciplinary, and what I learn in one subject really affects and influences how I think about stuff I'm learning in other subjects. So I found that to be really beneficial and very interesting. So I've also enjoyed kind of studying semantics and psycholinguistics in my second year here.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I was going to ask about how you felt like the connection between linguistics and the other half of your degree worked, because obviously the only way to study linguistics is as a joint honours, joint school degree. So yeah, it sounds like you've had sort of good experiences on that front, Jamie. I guess Dalvin, in your first year, it's a lot more compartmentalized, but have you felt like there have been sort of useful connections between the halves?
I think it's been very useful because you have grammar classes in Spanish. So I think being able to really delve into the grammar of another language is useful when you're studying semantics and morphology especially. I think next year it'll be more linked because I'll be doing the phonology of Spanish, and you can link historical linguistics to your language, so you can study the history and like etymology of the target language that you're studying as well.
Mm-hmm. So morphology being the kind of shape of words and things like that, right? Whereas phonology is sort of about sound systems and things. So obviously it's useful to study these in the abstract, but it can be particularly useful if you're applying it to a modern language that you're learning at the same time as well. Definitely. All right. So here's a slightly less academic question. What was it like settling into Oxford, and particularly how did you manage the workload? So something that people often worry about. I'm not going to say too much on this one. I'll leave it to you to talk about your experiences.
I think I was really worried before I arrived because I just had a stereotype and I didn't think I'd meet anyone similar to me. But from Freshers Week, it's a nice group of people and everyone's really friendly and it really feels like you're part of a community. So I feel like the college system really helps with settling in. And because there's so many events during Freshers Week, it's a lot easier to settle in, I'd say. Especially when on the third day, we met our tutors and we kind of discussed the course, and it was really nice to have a really informal meeting with everyone. So that makes you a lot less worried. So that was really nice. And then you do get set your work in Freshers, and at first I was a bit panicked, but you have to remember that it's just a starting point and it was a really interesting topic, so I think it was a nice way to delve into the year. And with regards to managing the workload, I think it's just making sure that you have timetables and keeping organised. So I'd always have my schedule in front of me, and then you can book in all your social things, your non-academic responsibilities, as well as your work. So I think being able to organise yourself from the first day will make the rest of the year a lot easier.
Yeah, I think I had probably a reasonably similar experience. I settled in very quickly and had a great time in my first term. Similar to Dalveen, I met a really great bunch of friends and just loved meeting loads of new people from a number of different backgrounds I hadn't necessarily met before. In terms of kind of the workload, I know, so during Freshers Week, I think I very, very briefly met my linguistics tutor. And then I received an essay, both one in philosophy and one in linguistics, and kind of almost similar to Dalveen, I initially panicked and thought, my goodness, how am I going to get this done? They're due on Monday and Tuesday, just after Freshers Week. But actually, I realized that the tutors were really kind and really adaptable, and they didn't expect a huge amount from the first essay. That was just kind of getting me interested and getting me to start to think about the topics at hand and how to write an essay. So my tutor extended my deadline when I explained that I had an overlap with the other half of my subject, which was very kind. And then, I had an essay question where I felt I had no idea what was going on, and I was really confused. And I think that's kind of an experience which is true of everyone when they initially start. But actually, it really wasn't that bad. And I remember going to my first tutorial and my tutor was like, okay, yeah, it sounds like you kind of sort of grasped the issue. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not what I expected. So I think that kind of boosted my confidence. And then going forward in terms of workload, the first kind of couple of terms, the workload was kind of a lot of smaller tasks. So it was kind of closer to school, where each of my tasks at university were kind of like 4 or 5 hour worksheets, or slightly longer, maybe 8 or 9 hours spent on an essay. So actually it was kind of just timetabling really carefully, as Dalveen said, and just doing them kind of for the date I had to complete them. But then as time's gone on, kind of in second year in particular, it's turned into longer, like less pieces of work, but longer time taken to complete each of them. So that's been really good, and I think it's made me more independent.
That's good. And it's good to hear that you've had time for both of you, had time for kind of social things as well, and that you can sort of balance these things appropriately, because there's a lot to do in Oxford that isn't work as well. So it's important to have that balance. No, that's good. All right. So the last question, and a biggie that people often worry about, is interviews, right? So especially how can you prepare for them, especially in a subject like linguistics, where you won't have a A-level syllabus to revise or something like that. And I think interviews are one of those things which have a lot of mythology around them and a lot of kind of unhelpful ideas, because basically the only point of the interview is for us to see how you think, to see what it would be like to work with you in a kind of tutorial setting. And we're not trying to trip you up. We're not trying to ask you sneaky questions and make you fall. Similarly, because linguistics is not something where we have a sort of syllabus that we can see whether you've been following along in school or not, there really aren't kind of questions that have correct answers most of the time. We're really just interested in seeing how you puzzle something out. So often tutors will ask you a kind of very general question to get you comfortable about why you chose to study linguistics, or what's interested you in particular, or maybe picking up something from your personal statement, and then moving on to something a bit more specific. So sometimes you'll be given a data set beforehand, so some interesting data from a language that you won't know, with some translations or something, and you'd be asked to have a look at that, and then they will ask you some questions, or they might present you with something in the interview or a puzzle or something like that. But the really important thing is that we're not trying to find out whether you've got the right answer or not. We're trying to find out whether you can think about it in a sensible way. I know I've had plenty of candidates where they might well have got the right answer, but if they give me a monosyllabic one answer reply, and then when I try and press them, they have nothing to say, that's much less impressive than someone who talks me through their answer, gets to the wrong answer, and then I nudge them a little bit and say, have you thought about this? And then they say, I made a mistake earlier. If that's the case, then such and such doesn't happen, and then you end up with a different answer, right? So talking me through how you're thinking, realizing that it's okay to make mistakes, all these kind of things are super important. So in terms of preparation, I think really, make sure that you know why you want to study linguistics, make sure that you can talk about the things that you're interested in, but just kind of show us that you care, show us that you're interested, and show us that you're thinking, and that you're present, and you generally will do much better than you fear. So I wonder whether you two could sort of share some experiences. How did you find interviews, and do you have any kind of words of wisdom or advice, or things that you might want to say to people who are feeling anxious about interviews in linguistics in particular?
I think it's important to remember that it's not an interrogation, it's a conversation, and you should leave feeling like you've learned something, or that you were doing an interesting activity. So with mine, obviously I was very, very nervous, and I remember he gave me a grammar sheet, so like a problem sheet with a language, and you had to kind of analyze the grammar of it. And I know for a fact that I definitely got it wrong, but I had an explanation and I had a reasoning, and I think just saying what you're thinking and going through your thought process with the person interviewing you, so they can see how you got to that idea, that works a lot better than getting the right answer straight away and not having an explanation or being able to talk about how you got there. So I think that's an important thing to remember, is just keep talking about what you're thinking, how you're going through the process of analysing the grammar sheet or whatever's in front of you. For preparation, the main thing I did was for linguistics, you have to take an MLAT entrance exam anyway. So with those problem sheets, I would meet up with my English teacher after classes, and I just he didn't really know what he was doing either, I didn't really know what I was doing, but we just kind of spoke about it. So I found that really useful, just being able to talk to someone who has some knowledge on language and analysing it. But you could even do it with a sibling or anyone, just being able to talk through the problem sheets. So
in
I
fact,
found that really...
there is no linguistics part in the MLAT anymore.
Oh, really?
So you still have to do the modern languages part, but no, that's we've dropped that now. So that's one less thing to worry about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe just practicing problem sheets.
Yeah, it's still not a bad idea to look at that
to
sort
be
of...
able to justify your opinion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then definitely doing pre-reading, so that when they ask what you're interested in, you have something to talk about. And then it should be enjoyable, because you are talking to an expert in linguistics. So I think ask questions if you're unsure about something, or if you're interested in something. it should just be a conversation.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Yeah, no, I think for my interviews, they were, in fact, Jamie was one of the people who interviewed me. And yeah, both interviews I had 2 interviews for linguistics, as all PPL students do, or they certainly did when I was interviewed. And they were all lovely and really kind. And in fact, for my second interview, which was not with Jamie, I'm diabetic and I had a hypoglycemic attack, so my blood sugars were really low and I was shaking. And so yeah, I wasn't in the best state, whatever. And they were really lovely. They said, take 10 minutes to just kind of recuperate. And when we started, they were very gentle at kind of prompting the conversation. So I promise they're human. They're not gonna attack or anything. And yeah, I mean, it does. My experience was very much that it seemed like the interviewers are just presenting you with some interesting linguistic phenomena or data sets, and just asking you to think a little bit more carefully and thinking about how you'd explain it, because I mean that's really what linguistics is about. And yeah, I mean, as both have said, it's not really about getting it right, it's about having some ideas about how to tackle the question and responding to what suggestions you're receiving. And yeah, also both of my interviews used my personal statement and stuff and like what I'd written on there. And I think the way to think about it is it's not like they're not quizzing you on the book you said you read. So I said I'd read Steven Pinker's The Language Instinct. It wasn't a quiz. It's more that because it's a common point, they know that you've read that. They know that that's an easy place to start and kind of discover. So it's actually meant, instead of to be an interrogation, it's meant to be kind of a nice touch point from which to start. And then they can start discussing issues which you thought about at maybe a basic level and really start to push you and think about how you can learn on the basis of that. So yeah, I just think it is really very much like a communicative process. And as part of that, you need to explain your reasoning as you go. So don't just as Jamie said, don't just give monosyllabic answers. Kind of explain what you're thinking and why your thoughts are what they are. And yeah, no, I think it should be fine. Otherwise, I mean, I really enjoyed my interviews, to be honest. They were very, very interesting and quite fun.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say that it sort of seems perverse because you're so worried about them beforehand, but actually people quite often have an enjoyable time because, like you say, Dalby, you're talking about something you're interested in with someone who's passionate about it, just like you, and that can be a really rewarding experience.
Yeah, and in terms of how you can prepare, I mean, I'd say reading or watching just some good sources. You don't need to cover like the entirety of the book market out there. Maybe two or three books sounds like a good idea over the course of your A levels. And I would suggesting the MLAT, even though you don't have to do it, the linguistics section. I did them all. I thought they were really fun because essentially that's what you do in the interview. You're given a data set and asked to give us some explanation of it. And when I did it, there were only 4 or 5 MLATs out there. And they weren't horrendously difficult. So I gave it a go at kind of the United Kingdom Linguistics Olympiad, which are like super hard versions. And if you're feeling excited, kind of very confident, you can do the International Linguistics Olympiads as well. I gave a few of those a go. And it just develops your reasoning and your ability to think about how to explain certain aspects of language which you're presented with.
Yeah, the Linguistics Olympiad is quite a good resource because they have a website with lots of past papers on, and they also have like answers for most of them, and some of them have little sort of guides as to talking you through them. So it can be a good way to get a feel for what the sort of things people are looking for in these kind of exercises are. Yeah, so it's like I should have put that in the resources. Actually, it's the UK Linguistics Olympiad, the UKLO, which is it's a really good resource. Okay. Yeah, well, that is all that we wanted to cover. As I say, there's a few resources here. I've put my email address down. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Then there's various kind of websites from the college and from the university. Some reading, as Dalvin said, the department has a reading list. And yeah, a useful collection of other things. Don't feel at all like you have to become an expert in linguistics before you come to interview. In fact, like often people will sometimes try to show off, I think, by writing kind of technical terms and things, or throwing in sort of words that they don't really understand, and then as soon as you press them on it, it becomes clear they don't understand it. So it's far better to be kind of comfortable with what you're saying, even if what you're saying is not highly technical and using the jargon or whatever, because the jargon doesn't really mean anything, right? The jargon is only helpful if it helps make something clearer. So if you don't really know what the words mean, you know, we're not going to impress us by using big words, I guess is the is the point. So it's much better to be kind of honest in your ignorance. I guess that's a much healthier position for anyone to be in, I think, in any discipline. So okay, unless there's anything else that any of you have to add, I think we'll wrap it up.
No,
there.
best of luck.
Yes, exactly.
luck.
Best of luck with it all. All right, thank you.